Let's take a look at turning a spreadsheet into a functional business tool using internal. Here, we have a Google Sheet that we use to manage tasks for a small team. Now, let's hop over to internal, where we can start building a user interface that will allow us to manage that spreadsheet in a better way with controls and logic. We want the ability to add new tasks, so the first thing that we'll do is add a form component to our space. For our data source, we're going to choose the Google Sheet called task list. And for our function, what we want to do is insert tasks record. This will allow us to add a new task to our data sheet. We can also edit the form name and customize the button text as well and add an icon. Now let's add some fields to our form so we can configure them. For the task, we're going to leave this as default because it's an input where we want the user to complete the field. For the description, we're just going to change this from an input to a text area, so that gives a little bit more room for user to enter more information. For the date created, we can make this a hidden field since we're going to automatically set it. And we are going to set it to the date and the time that the button is clicked. And same thing for status. We're going to make this hidden since we're going to automatically set it. And what we want to do here is set a custom default value, where that value will be the word unassigned. So that's a status that we want once we create a new task. The next thing that we'll want to do is add a table component. And this component is going to help us assign and claim our newly created tasks. We're going to select the same data source, which is the task list. We're also going to have it list our tasks records. We'll call this unassigned. And we're going to add some sorting. We're going to sort it by date created and descending. So we're going to find the most recent newly created tasks. And since we only want to show unassigned tasks, we can create a filter here where the status is equal to unassigned. We can go clean up this by hiding some fields that we don't need, such as the row number, the status, the assignee, and the date completed. We can also clean up the date format to look a little bit better and choose any one of these that we want. Next, let's add some actions so that we can claim and delete some of the tasks here. The first thing that we'll need to do is add a flexbox component. This will allow us to put together multiple components in a single area. Let's first add a component, which will be a button, and this button will allow us to claim a task. So we're going to operate on that same task list Google Sheet, and here we're going to choose to update the task record. Change this button to claim. And for our fields, since we want this to operate on that same row, what we're going to do is for the row number that we want, we're going to use a value from the component and we're going to bind it to this row, the data in this row, and the row number. And all this does is tell internal that the task record that we want to update is the one that sits in this row, the same row as the button. For our status, we can add that as a field. And here, we're going to select a custom default value and we're going to make it in progress. Let's now add the assignee field. And for this one, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to bind it to the current user and then the email. And what this will do is it will grab whatever is the email of the current user of this tool from within internal and use that as the assignee value. Let's go back to our flexbox. And now let's add a button to delete. We'll use that same task list. This time we'll choose the delete tasks record. Make the trash can an icon. We don't need any text on it. And for delete functions, all you need to input is the row number, so internal knows which row to delete. And in this case, we're going to do the same thing. And we are going to bind it to the row number found in this row. Let's head over to design and make this a white button. Now we want a way to manage active tasks, so let's go ahead and add another component, which will be a card list to help us do that. For our card list, we're going to select the Google Sheet task list again, and we're going to have it list our tasks records. For our title, let's call this Active Tasks. And for the name that we want to put at the top of each card, we can actually use this card's data, and we'll use the task description at the top. We don't need a row number and we don't need tasks since we just put that as the name of each card. For our status, we can make it look a little bit nicer by adding some icons. We can also quickly change the date times for date created as well as date completed. Let's add some filters. First, since we want this to only show our active tasks, one thing we can do is create a status filter where the status is not equal to unassigned. Another useful filter would be to only show the current user's active tasks. And one way we can do that is by creating a filter for the assignee, making it equal to a component value. And then for our binding, we're going to select current user and then email. Once you do that, you can see the assignee is now filtered to only show my email. But let's create another filter that might be useful for us. We can do this by adding a drop-down component. We'll call it status filter. And then for our drop-down options, we're going to have the various states. And now we can go back to our card list and go down to filters and add another filter. And in this case, we want status, once again, is going to be equal to a component value. And here we're going to add the status filter that we just created and the value there. So it'll match up the status of the card with the status that is shown in this dropdown. The last thing we want to add to our tool is the ability to mark active tasks as complete. And so we'll go into our card list fields and we're going to add a new button that will allow us to do that. For this button, we're going to operate on the task list and we're going to have it update tasks. For the button, we'll just call this mark done, give it a little check mark. And then for our fields, well, for our row number, what we want to do is bind it to a component. And in this case, the binding that we're going to use is this card and the row number in this card. All it's saying here is for this button to interact with the data that is in the card. Next, we're going to add the status field. And in this case, we're going to set a custom default value, and that value is just going to be complete. And for the date completed, we can have that be automatically set to the date and time that this button is clicked, which is great. And we can also add a visibility rule since we don't want this button to appear all of the time. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to show it on completed items. What we can do is select a binding where this card's status is equal to in progress. And so now it's only going to show this button when the card is still in progress. Let's go back to our card list. We'll move the button around a little bit. Now, if we go to publish and take a look at our tool, we can see that we have a new task management tool where we can add new tasks We can manage the task list and claim unassigned tasks for ourselves. And we can find those active tasks and mark them as complete. That's it. Thanks for watching.